Millionaire marries a poor woman as a joke. What she does next leaves him speechless. Brandon Montgomery leaned back in his chair, swirling the amber liquid in his crystal tumbler. The soft glow of chandeliers reflected off the polished surfaces of his expansive penthouse. Around him, his friends laughed boisterously, their conversations a mixture of business deals, exotic vacations, and tasteless jokes. Brandon, the charismatic leader of the group, thrived in this environment, a world of wealth, privilege, and power. "All right, gentlemen," Brandon said with a mischievous smirk, setting his glass down. "Let's up the stakes tonight. I'm bored of the usual bets." His friend, Greg, raised an eyebrow. "What did you have in mind, Brandon?" Brandon leaned forward, his eyes glinting with mischief. "How about a challenge? I'll find someone so far beneath our world, someone who would never fit in here, and marry her, just for fun." The room erupted in laughter. "You've lost your mind," Greg exclaimed, shaking his head. "Marry her? For fun? What's the catch?" "No catch," Brandon replied. "Think of it as performance art. I'll sweep her off her feet, make her believe it's all real, and then, when the time is right, I'll reveal the truth. Imagine her face." The group howled with laughter, toasting to Brandon's audacious plan. Brandon, however, was already thinking about how he would execute his latest joke. Emily Sanders wiped her hands on her apron, glancing at the clock above the diner counter. It was almost closing time, and her shift had been grueling. The diner, a small but beloved spot in her neighborhood, was bustling with regulars who appreciated Emily's warm smile and kind demeanor. But beneath her cheerful exterior, Emily was exhausted. She dreamed of something more, her own bakery, where she could bring her creative ideas to life. Late at night, she would sketch out plans and recipes in a battered notebook, imagining the day when she could finally leave the diner behind. But with her mother's medical bills piling up, Emily knew that dream was still far out of reach. The bell above the diner door jingled, pulling Emily from her thoughts. She looked up to see a man walk in, tall, impeccably dressed, and exuding an air of confidence. Brandon Montgomery. He approached the counter with a smile that seemed both charming and calculated. "Coffee, please," he said, his voice smooth. Emily nodded, grabbing a mug and filling it with the steaming brew. As she set it down in front of him, Brandon leaned closer. "Long day?" Emily smiled politely. "You could say that." "Must be tough," Brandon said, his tone sympathetic. "Working so hard every day. Do you ever get time for yourself?" Emily hesitated, unsure of how to respond. There was something disarming about him, though she couldn't quite put her finger on it. "I manage," she said finally. "What about you? What do you do?" Brandon chuckled. "Oh, I dabble in a few things. Mostly business ventures. But enough about me. What's your story?" Over the next few weeks, Brandon became a regular at the diner. Each visit, he made a point to sit at the counter, chatting with Emily and learning more about her life. At first, she was cautious, unsure why someone like him would take an interest in her. But as he continued to show up, asking thoughtful questions, offering compliments, and even leaving generous tips, Emily began to let her guard down. Brandon's charm was intoxicating. He listened intently as Emily shared stories about her mother, her struggles, and her dream of opening a bakery. He would nod thoughtfully, occasionally offering words of encouragement that made her heart flutter. One evening, as they sat together after closing, Brandon surprised her. "Emily," he said, his tone serious. "You're an incredible woman. I've never met anyone like you." Emily's cheeks flushed. "Brandon, I don't know what to say." "Say you'll let me take you out," he said, his eyes locking with hers. "Somewhere special. Just you and me." Emily hesitated, her mind racing. She couldn't deny the connection she felt with him, but she also couldn't shake the feeling that they came from two completely different worlds. Still, his sincerity seemed genuine, and for the first time in years, she allowed herself to hope. "Okay," she said softly. "I'd like that." Their relationship progressed quickly. Brandon pulled out all the stops, whisking Emily away to luxurious dinners, sending her flowers at work, and showering her with affection. For Emily, it felt like a fairy tale. She had always believed in hard work and modest living, but Brandon's world was intoxicating, a glimpse into a life she had never dared to imagine. Within months, Brandon proposed. He rented out an entire rooftop restaurant, filling it with candles and live music. As the sun set over the city skyline, he dropped to one knee, holding out a glittering diamond ring. "Emily Sanders," he said, his voice filled with emotion. "Will you make me the happiest man alive and be my wife?" Tears filled Emily's eyes as she nodded. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I will." The guests erupted into applause, and Brandon swept her into his arms, his grin widening as he glanced at his friends in the crowd. They raised their glasses, toasting to his success. The wedding was a grand affair, held at a sprawling estate with hundreds of guests. Emily felt like a princess, walking down the aisle in a gown that shimmered in the sunlight. Brandon stood at the altar, his smile as charming as ever. But beneath the surface, Emily couldn't shake a nagging feeling. The whirlwind romance, the opulence, the way Brandon's friends looked at her, it all felt too good to be true. She pushed the doubts aside, telling herself that she deserved this happiness. As they exchanged vows, Brandon's voice was steady and confident. "I promise to love, honor, and cherish you," he said, slipping the ring onto her finger. But as he gazed into Emily's eyes, a flicker of amusement crossed his face, so brief she almost missed it. The honeymoon phase was as lavish as the wedding itself. Brandon whisked Emily away to exotic locations, private beaches, luxury resorts, and candlelit dinners under the stars. To anyone looking in from the outside, it seemed like a dream marriage. Emily, however, started noticing cracks in the fairy tale. Brandon's affection felt performative at times, especially around his friends. His grand gestures, though impressive, often seemed to serve as opportunities for him to bask in admiration rather than genuine acts of love. Emily dismissed these doubts, reminding herself that Brandon had opened a door to a world she had only dreamed of. But her unease grew. One evening, a few months into their marriage, Brandon hosted a dinner party at their sprawling mansion. Emily was nervous. These gatherings always made her feel out of place. The women were impeccably dressed, dripping in diamonds, while the men talked about their latest investments and golf trips. Emily, despite her best efforts, couldn't shake the feeling that she didn't belong. Brandon, as usual, was the life of the party. He laughed loudly, exchanged inside jokes with his friends, and barely acknowledged Emily's presence. She hovered near the edge of the room, clutching her glass of wine and trying to disappear into the background. That's when she overheard them. Brandon and his friends were gathered near the bar, their voices low but audible over the hum of conversation. "I still can't believe you actually did it," Greg said, shaking his head in disbelief. "You married her." Brandon smirked, taking a sip of his drink. "I told you I would," he said casually. "It was all part of the plan." Emily froze, her heart pounding. She stepped closer, staying hidden behind a column. "But why?" one of the others asked, laughing. "You're Brandon Montgomery. You could have had anyone." "Exactly," Brandon said. "That's what makes it hilarious. I mean, look at her. She's so ordinary. It's like performance art. Marrying her was the ultimate prank." The group burst into laughter, their voices echoing in Emily's ears. She felt her chest tighten, her breath catching in her throat. She wanted to storm out, to confront Brandon, to scream at him for making a mockery of her love. But she stayed frozen in place, rooted by a mixture of shock and heartbreak. Later that night, long after the guests had left, Emily sat alone in the darkened living room. Brandon had gone to bed without noticing her absence, completely oblivious to the storm brewing within her. Emily replayed the conversation in her mind, each word cutting deeper than the last. The man she thought she loved, the man who had promised to cherish her, had used her as the punchline to a cruel joke. She felt humiliated, betrayed, and utterly broken. But as the hours ticked by, her sadness began to transform into something else: determination. Emily had spent her life overcoming challenges, and this would be no different. She wasn't going to let Brandon's arrogance define her or dictate her future. She wiped her tears, grabbed her notebook, and began writing. Over the next few weeks, Emily moved carefully. She maintained the facade of a dutiful wife, attending social events and playing her role perfectly. Brandon remained none the wiser, too absorbed in his own world to notice the fire burning within her. Behind the scenes, Emily was laying the groundwork for her escape and her revenge. She started by reaching out to old friends and acquaintances, rekindling connections she had let fade during her whirlwind romance. She attended business seminars, networking events, and workshops, soaking up knowledge and building relationships. She also began saving. Every time Brandon handed her a credit card or gifted her jewelry, she found ways to convert it into cash. Slowly but surely, she amassed a small but growing fund to support her next move. One afternoon, Emily visited a small bakery in the city. It was a cozy, unassuming place, filled with the comforting aroma of fresh bread and pastries. She struck up a conversation with the owner, a kind woman named Marisol, who shared stories of her own journey as a small business owner. "I started this place with nothing but a dream and a few recipes," Marisol said, her eyes shining with pride. "It wasn't easy, but it was worth every struggle." Emily felt a spark of inspiration. Marisol's story reminded her of the dream she had once sketched in her notebook, a bakery of her own, where she could create something meaningful. When Marisol offered to mentor her, Emily eagerly accepted. Emily's transformation was gradual but steady. With Marisol's guidance, she honed her baking skills, perfected her recipes, and learned the ins and outs of running a business. She poured her heart into every detail, working late into the night while Brandon remained oblivious. As the months went by, Emily's bakery plans began to take shape. She secured a small storefront in a bustling neighborhood, using her savings and a small business loan to renovate the space. She kept her progress a secret, determined to reveal everything on her terms. Meanwhile, Brandon's life was as extravagant as ever. He continued to throw lavish parties, splurge on unnecessary luxuries, and bask in the adoration of his social circle. But cracks were beginning to show. His investments were faltering, his spending outpaced his earnings, and whispers of his financial troubles were starting to circulate. Brandon dismissed the concerns, convinced that his charm and reputation would carry him through. But he couldn't ignore the growing distance between him and Emily. She had become quieter, more reserved, and less engaged in their shared social life. Brandon assumed she was simply adjusting to their lifestyle, never imagining that she was plotting her next move. The day of the bakery's grand opening arrived, and Emily felt a mixture of excitement and nerves. She had poured everything into this moment: her time, her energy, and her dreams. The storefront was a reflection of her vision, warm, inviting, and filled with the aroma of freshly baked goods. As the doors opened and customers began to pour in, Emily felt a surge of pride. This was hers. This was the start of something new. The media quickly caught wind of the story, intrigued by the millionaire's wife-turned-entrepreneur. Articles highlighted Emily's journey, praising her resilience and vision. Her bakery became an instant hit, attracting customers from all over the city. Brandon, of course, heard about the bakery through his friends. He was stunned. Emily hadn't mentioned anything about starting a business, let alone one that was making headlines. His initial reaction was amusement. What could she possibly know about running a business? But as the days turned into weeks, and the bakery's success continued to grow, Brandon's amusement turned to confusion. Emily's name was everywhere, her story captivating the public. She was no longer just his wife. She was a rising star in her own right. Brandon decided it was time to confront her. Brandon stood in the bakery's doorway, his tailored suit starkly out of place among the warm, rustic decor. The bell above the door jingled as he stepped inside, drawing the attention of both customers and staff. Emily, who had been behind the counter arranging a display of freshly baked pastries, froze for a moment when she saw him. Then, with practiced composure, she straightened and walked toward him. "Brandon," she said evenly, her voice calm but devoid of warmth. "What brings you here?" Brandon glanced around the bustling bakery, his expression a mix of curiosity and disbelief. "I think the better question is, what are you doing here, Emily?" he asked, his tone laced with condescension. "I mean, this is impressive, I guess. But why didn't you tell me you were starting a business?" Emily crossed her arms, meeting his gaze without flinching. "I didn't think it would interest you." Brandon frowned, the weight of her words sinking in. "Come on, Emily. You're my wife. Of course, I'm interested." She let out a small laugh, though there was no humor in it. "Your wife? That's funny. I thought I was just your little joke." The color drained from Brandon's face. "What are you talking about?" Emily stepped closer, lowering her voice so only he could hear. "I heard you, Brandon. That night at the party. You and your friends laughing about how marrying me was all part of some ridiculous prank. Do you think I'm stupid? That I wouldn't figure it out?" Brandon's jaw tightened, but he didn't deny. He had always prided himself on his ability to talk his way out of any situation, but for once, he was at a loss for words. Emily continued, her voice steady but tinged with emotion. "You humiliated me, Brandon. You made me believe you cared about me, only to turn me into a punchline. But guess what? I'm not the joke here. You are." Brandon stared at her, stunned into silence. For the first time, he saw Emily not as the timid, unassuming woman he had underestimated, but as someone strong, determined, and entirely out of his league. "I didn't mean for it to go this far," he said finally, his voice quieter. "It was a mistake." "A mistake?" Emily repeated, her tone sharp. "No, Brandon. A mistake is spilling coffee on someone or forgetting a birthday. What you did was deliberate. True. And now, you're going to see exactly what I'm capable of." The confrontation marked a turning point in their relationship. Brandon left the bakery that day, his confidence shaken. He had always believed himself to be untouchable, but Emily's words lingered in his mind, forcing him to confront the reality of his actions. Meanwhile, Emily's success continued to soar. Her bakery became a cornerstone of the community, not just for its delicious pastries but for the story behind it. A story of resilience, determination, and rising above adversity. She began giving interviews, sharing her journey with a growing audience and inspiring others to pursue their dreams. Her public presence grew, and with it came opportunities she had never imagined. Investors approached her about expanding the business, while media outlets clamored for more of her story. Emily navigated it all with grace, her confidence growing with each passing day. Brandon, on the other hand, found himself struggling to keep up appearances. His financial troubles deepened, and his social circle began to shrink as his peers distanced themselves from his growing reputation as a reckless spender. He couldn't escape the shadow of Emily's success, which seemed to follow him wherever he went. One evening, as Brandon sat alone in his mansion, scrolling through news articles about Emily, he felt a pang of something he hadn't experienced in years: regret. Not just for the consequences he was facing, but for the way he had treated her. He had underestimated her, belittled her, and used her, and now she was thriving in a way he couldn't have predicted. For the first time, Brandon began to wonder if there was a way to make amends. But Emily wasn't interested in reconciliation. She had moved on, focusing on building her empire and using her platform to uplift others. She launched a mentorship program for aspiring entrepreneurs, particularly women from underprivileged backgrounds. Her workshops and seminars were packed with attendees eager to learn from her expertise and draw inspiration from her journey. At one of these events, Emily shared a pivotal moment from her past, the night she overheard Brandon and his friends mocking her. She didn't name him, but the pain and determination in her voice were unmistakable. "That moment could have broken me," she said, addressing the audience. "But I chose to let it fuel me instead. I realized that no one gets to define my worth but me. And I want every one of you to remember that no matter what challenges you face, you have the power to rise above them." The room erupted into applause, and Emily smiled, feeling the weight of her journey lift just a little more. She had turned her pain into purpose, and there was no turning back. Brandon decided to attend one of Emily's public events, not out of malice or a desire to undermine her, but because he wanted to understand the woman she had become. He sat in the back of the room, unnoticed among the crowd, as Emily spoke about her journey and the lessons she had learned. As he listened, he felt a mix of emotions: pride, shame, admiration, and regret. He realized that Emily had become everything he had once claimed to be: a leader, an inspiration, and someone who commanded respect without demanding it. After the event, Brandon approached Emily cautiously. She saw him coming but didn't move, her expression unreadable. "Emily, he began, his voice softer than she had ever heard it. "I just wanted to say, I'm sorry. For everything. I don't expect forgiveness, but I needed you to hear it." Emily studied him for a moment before responding. "Brandon, I've already forgiven you. Not for your sake, but for mine. I don't have room in my life for resentment. But forgiveness doesn't mean I forget. I've moved on, and I hope you can too." Brandon nodded, his chest tightening. "Thank you," he said simply. And with that, he walked away, leaving Emily to continue her journey, stronger, wiser, and more empowered than ever. Brandon left the event feeling a sense of closure he hadn't expected. Emily's words were ringing in his ears, both her forgiveness and her firm dismissal of any chance at reconciliation. He realized for the first time that Emily had truly outgrown him, not just as a wife, but as a person. She was on a trajectory he could only dream of now, and he was left behind in the wreckage of his own choices. But for Brandon, the humiliation wasn't over yet. As news of Emily's success continued to grow, more stories about their marriage began to circulate. Former acquaintances of Brandon gleefully recounted the tale of how he had treated their marriage as a joke, only to see Emily rise above him in every conceivable way. The media latched onto the story, framing Emily as a hero and Brandon as the perfect example of arrogance brought low. Brandon found himself retreating from the public eye, avoiding social gatherings and focusing on trying to salvage his finances. But his attempts to rebuild were met with skepticism and ridicule. Investors, wary of his track record, were reluctant to back his ventures. Former allies turned a blind eye to his calls for help. Slowly, Brandon began to understand just how isolating his own arrogance had made him. Meanwhile, Emily's bakery empire continued to expand. She opened a second location in another bustling neighborhood, followed by a flagship store in the city's upscale district. Each new bakery was a reflection of her vision, warm, inviting, and deeply rooted in the values she held dear. Customers flocked to her shops not just for the pastries but for the story behind them. But Emily's ambitions didn't stop at baking. She launched a product line of specialty ingredients, leveraging her growing influence to collaborate with local farmers and suppliers. The products were an instant hit, cementing Emily's status as a force to be reckoned with in the culinary world. At a press conference for the launch of her product line, a journalist asked Emily about her meteoric rise and the challenges she had faced along the way. "You've built something extraordinary," the journalist said. "What drives you to keep pushing forward?" Emily paused, considering the question. "I think it's the knowledge that success isn't just about what you achieve, it's about how you use it to uplift others. I've been through my share of challenges, but those experiences have shaped me. They've taught me the value of resilience, of believing in yourself even when others don't." Her answer was met with applause, and Emily felt a swell of pride. She had come so far, and she wasn't just building a business, she was building a legacy. Brandon, however, couldn't avoid Emily's success, no matter how much he tried. Her name appeared in every major publication, her products lined the shelves of stores he frequented, and her story became a topic of conversation among the very social circles that had once laughed at her. He couldn't escape the comparisons, how Emily had taken the pain he caused her and turned it into power, while he was left floundering. One night, as he sat in his empty mansion scrolling through social media, Brandon stumbled across a live stream of Emily giving a talk at a business summit. He hesitated for a moment before clicking on it, the screen filling with her image. Emily stood on a stage, poised and confident, addressing a packed audience. Her words were measured and inspiring, weaving together stories of her journey with advice for aspiring entrepreneurs. "The biggest lesson I've learned," she said, her voice steady, "is that no one else gets to define your worth. People will doubt you, dismiss you, and sometimes even try to break you. But their opinions don't matter. What matters is how you see yourself and what you're willing to fight for." Brandon felt a lump in his throat as he listened. She wasn't just speaking to the audience, she was speaking to him, even if she didn't know it. He had defined her worth once, and he had been so wrong. Despite his growing self-awareness, Brandon couldn't shake the feeling of failure that clung to him. He threw himself into philanthropic work, hoping to rebuild his reputation and find some semblance of purpose. He started donating to causes Emily had championed, quietly funding scholarships for underprivileged students and supporting local businesses. At one such event, a fundraiser for small business grants, Brandon found himself in an unfamiliar position, sitting in the audience, watching others take the spotlight. Emily, of course, was one of the keynote speakers. Her presence was magnetic, her words carrying the same blend of authority and compassion that had made her a household name. After the event, Brandon approached one of the organizers, offering to contribute to the grant program. The organizer, impressed by his sincerity, welcomed his involvement but made it clear that his support would come with no fanfare or public recognition. Brandon agreed without hesitation. He wasn't doing this for the spotlight anymore. He was doing it because he finally understood the value of humility and giving back. Back at the bakery, Emily's focus was on mentoring the next generation of entrepreneurs. She had started hosting weekly workshops, inviting young people to learn about everything from financial planning to brand development. The workshops were packed, and Emily thrived in the role of teacher and guide. During one session, a young woman approached her with tears in her eyes. "Miss Sanders," she said, her voice trembling, "I just wanted to thank you. Your story gave me the courage to start my own business. I thought I couldn't do it, but you showed me that it's possible." Emily smiled, her heart swelling with gratitude. "You can do it," she said firmly. "And when you do, remember to pass it on. Help someone else believe in themselves, just like someone once helped me." The young woman nodded, her resolve strengthening. Emily watched her walk away, feeling a deep sense of fulfillment. This was her purpose, not just building a business, but building people. Emily's weekly workshops became a cornerstone of her growing empire. Entrepreneurs from all walks of life came to learn from her, eager to gain insights from someone who had risen from humble beginnings to the heights of success. The workshops weren't just about business. They were about resilience, self-worth, and the power of community. One evening, as Emily closed up after a particularly moving session, she found herself reflecting on how far she had come. Her bakery empire was thriving, her product line was expanding, and her mentorship program was empowering hundreds of people. Yet, despite her accomplishments, she felt a lingering desire to do more. She decided to launch a foundation dedicated to supporting small businesses in underserved communities. The foundation would provide grants, training, and resources to help aspiring entrepreneurs overcome the barriers she had once faced. Emily threw herself into the project with the same determination that had fueled her from the start. Brandon, meanwhile, was finding quiet satisfaction in his philanthropic work. He had begun attending meetings and events where his contributions could make a difference, but he always stayed in the background, avoiding the limelight. For the first time, he was learning to derive fulfillment not from recognition, but from the impact of his actions. One day, Brandon received an email from one of the grant recipients he had supported. The young man, a recent college graduate, shared how the grant had allowed him to start a tech company that was already gaining traction. He expressed his gratitude, writing, "Your support gave me the chance to chase my dreams. I'll never forget it." Brandon stared at the screen, a lump forming in his throat. He realized that these small moments of connection and gratitude meant more to him than all the lavish parties and accolades he had once craved. As Emily's foundation gained momentum, it caught the attention of major media outlets. Interviews, profiles, and feature articles painted her as a visionary leader who was reshaping the business landscape. Her story became a beacon of hope for countless people who saw themselves in her journey. During one particularly high-profile interview, the host asked Emily about the challenges she had faced along the way. "You've achieved so much," the host said, "but it hasn't been an easy road. What kept you going during the hardest times?" Emily smiled, her expression thoughtful. "I think what kept me going was the belief that my circumstances didn't define me. I knew I had the power to create a better future, not just for myself but for others. And I wanted to prove that kindness, resilience, and hard work could triumph over anything." Her words resonated deeply with viewers, sparking a wave of support for her foundation and her broader mission. Brandon watched the interview from his living room, his emotions a mix of admiration and regret. He had seen Emily evolve into someone extraordinary, someone who had not only survived the pain he caused but turned it into a catalyst for greatness. And yet, he knew that no matter how much he changed, he would always be a footnote in her story. Determined to continue his path of quiet redemption, Brandon reached out to Emily's foundation anonymously, offering to fund a series of grants for entrepreneurs in need. He didn't want credit or recognition. He simply wanted to contribute to the cause that had become so meaningful to him. When Emily's team received the donation, they were thrilled. The funds allowed them to expand their reach, supporting more entrepreneurs than ever before. Emily, however, couldn't help but wonder who had been so generous. The anonymity intrigued her, but she decided not to dwell on it. Her focus was on the impact the donation would have, not the person behind it. Months later, at an event celebrating the foundation's first year, Emily stood before a crowd of supporters, partners, and grant recipients. The room was filled with energy and excitement as she spoke about the milestones they had achieved and the lives they had changed. This foundation is proof that when we come together, we can create something extraordinary, she said, her voice filled with emotion. It's not just about business, it's about building a future where everyone has the opportunity to thrive. The audience erupted into applause, and Emily felt a deep sense of fulfillment. This was her purpose. This was her legacy. Brandon, who had attended the event quietly and unannounced, watched from the back of the room. He didn't approach Emily this time, choosing instead to leave before the event ended. But as he walked out into the night, he felt a sense of peace he hadn't known in years. He didn't need her forgiveness or her recognition anymore. He had found something far more important: the ability to make a difference, not for his own benefit but for the benefit of others. And in doing so, he had begun to rebuild himself, not as the man he once was, but as the man he wanted to be. Emily continued to soar, her story inspiring millions and her work transforming countless lives. She had turned her pain into power, her betrayal into brilliance, and her dreams into reality. And as she walked through the world she had built, she carried with her the knowledge that she was more than enough. As Emily's foundation expanded, she found herself increasingly involved in the communities her work aimed to uplift. She visited neighborhoods that reminded her of where she'd come from, meeting aspiring entrepreneurs who poured their hearts into their ideas despite the odds stacked against them. Each conversation left her inspired, fueling her drive to keep pushing forward. One day, during a visit to a small town, Emily met a woman named Clara, who ran a struggling catering business out of her home. Clara's story mirrored Emily's in many ways: limited resources, endless obstacles, and a determination to succeed no matter what. "I just want to show my daughters that anything is possible," Clara said, her voice trembling with emotion. "Even when it feels like the whole world is against you." Emily reached across the table, placing a hand over Clara's. "You're already doing that," she said gently. "But we're going to help you take it even further." The foundation provided Clara with a grant, business mentorship, and access to resources she'd never had before. Within months, Clara's business transformed, gaining recognition and new customers. Emily watched from the sidelines, proud to see another dream take flight. Meanwhile, Brandon was navigating his own quiet transformation. His philanthropic efforts had earned him a small but growing reputation as someone who genuinely cared about making a difference. People who had once dismissed him as arrogant and shallow began to see a different side of him, a side that surprised even Brandon himself. At a networking event for nonprofit leaders, Brandon struck up a conversation with an older man named Victor, who ran a successful mentorship program for at-risk youth. Victor had a no-nonsense demeanor, but as they talked, Brandon found himself opening up in a way he hadn't before. "I used to think success was about power and recognition," Brandon admitted. "But now I realize it's about the impact you leave behind." "I wish I'd learned that sooner." Victor nodded, his expression thoughtful. "It's not about when you learn the lesson," he said. "It's about what you do with it once you've learned it." The words stuck with Brandon, becoming a guiding principle in his journey. Emily's rise continued to attract attention, and with it came new opportunities. One of the most significant was an invitation to partner with a global organization dedicated to empowering women in business. The partnership would take Emily's work to an international stage, allowing her to reach communities across the world. The decision wasn't an easy one. Accepting the partnership would require more of Emily's time and energy, potentially pulling her away from the hands-on work she loved. But it also represented a chance to scale her impact in ways she had only dreamed of. During a late-night meeting with her leadership team, Emily weighed the pros and cons. "This isn't just about me," she said, looking around the room. "It's about the people we're helping and the future we're building. If this partnership can amplify that, then it's worth it." The team agreed, and the partnership was announced with great fanfare. The media hailed it as a groundbreaking collaboration, further solidifying Emily's status as a visionary leader. Brandon couldn't avoid hearing about the partnership. It was splashed across headlines and social media, with glowing praise for Emily's accomplishments. He felt a pang of regret, not because he envied her success, but because he wished he'd been the kind of man who could have supported her journey instead of trying to diminish it. One evening, while working late at his small office, Brandon received an email from a young entrepreneur who had benefited from one of the grants he had funded. The email was heartfelt, thanking Brandon for believing in people who were often overlooked. "It's not just the money," the entrepreneur wrote. "It's the fact that someone thought we were worth investing in. That belief means everything." Brandon read the email several times, the words resonating deeply. He realized that, in his own way, he was starting to understand the kind of legacy Emily had been building all along. Emily's partnership with the global organization brought her to new places and new challenges. She traveled to remote villages, bustling cities, and everything in between, meeting women who were eager to learn and grow. Each encounter reminded her of the universal struggles and dreams that connected people across the world. During one trip, Emily visited a rural community where women were starting small businesses to support their families. She sat with them in a circle, listening to their stories and sharing her own. One woman, Amina, spoke about the difficulties of balancing her work with raising her children. "It feels like I'm constantly failing at something," Amina said, tears welling up in her eyes. Emily reached for Amina's hand, her voice soft but firm. "You're not failing," she said. "You're doing the best you can with what you have, and that's more than enough. And now, you have us to help you." The room filled with murmurs of agreement, and Amina's tears turned to a smile. Moments like these reminded Emily why she had chosen this path, because every step forward was a victory for someone who had once felt defeated. Brandon continued to support Emily's foundation anonymously, funneling resources into programs that aligned with her mission. He knew she would never know the extent of his contributions, and that was how he wanted it. This wasn't about redemption, it was about doing what was right. As Brandon walked through the city one evening, he passed one of Emily's bakeries. The warm glow of the interior, the laughter of customers, and the smell of freshly baked bread filled the air. He stopped for a moment, watching from the outside. It was a scene that encapsulated everything Emily stood for: community, resilience, and hope. For the first time in a long time, Brandon smiled, not out of pride or satisfaction, but out of genuine admiration for the woman he had once underestimated. Months after Emily's partnership with the global organization was announced, her foundation held its largest event yet, an international summit on entrepreneurial empowerment. Leaders, entrepreneurs, and changemakers from around the world gathered in a grand conference hall, eager to share their stories and learn from one another. The atmosphere buzzed with excitement as Emily took the stage. She wore a simple yet elegant outfit, exuding confidence and humility. The room fell silent as she began to speak. "When I started this journey," she said, her voice steady, "I never imagined it would bring me here. I was just a woman with a dream, trying to find my way in a world that often felt overwhelming. But what I've learned is that dreams don't have to stay dreams. With determination, support, and a belief in your own worth, they can become reality." She paused, her eyes scanning the crowd. "But this isn't about me. It's about all of you, the dreamers, the doers, the risk-takers. Each of you has the power to create something extraordinary, not just for yourselves but for the people around you. That's the true measure of success, the impact we leave behind." The audience erupted into applause, a standing ovation that lasted long after Emily stepped off the stage. She felt a surge of gratitude as she walked back to her seat, knowing she had done something meaningful. In the back of the room, Brandon watched quietly. He hadn't planned to attend, but he couldn't resist the chance to see the culmination of everything Emily had worked for. As he listened to her speech, he felt a mixture of pride and sadness. She had become a force of nature, someone who inspired millions, while he had spent years trying to undo the damage of his past. After the event, Brandon approached one of the summit organizers, offering his congratulations. "This was incredible," he said, his voice genuine. "Emily's work is changing the world." The organizer nodded, smiling. "It's because she never lost sight of her purpose. She's not just building businesses, she's building people." Brandon couldn't agree more. Later that evening, Emily stood on the balcony of her hotel room, looking out over the city lights. The summit had been a success, but her mind was already racing with ideas for what came next. She thought about the people she had met, the stories they had shared, and the opportunities still waiting to be explored. Her phone buzzed with a notification. It was a message from Clara, the woman she had helped months ago. "Emily, I just wanted to thank you again. My business is thriving, my daughters are proud of me, and I finally feel like I'm living the life I've always dreamed of. You made that possible. Thank you for believing in me when I couldn't believe in myself." Emily's eyes welled with tears as she read the message. It was moments like these that reminded her why she had started this journey. She wasn't just building her own legacy, she was helping others build theirs. Brandon, meanwhile, continued his quiet path of redemption. He no longer sought validation or recognition for his efforts, finding fulfillment in the work itself. He became a mentor for young entrepreneurs, sharing the lessons he had learned, both from his successes and his failures. One day, as he reviewed applications for a new grant program, he came across a proposal from a single mother trying to start a catering business. The passion and determination in her words reminded him of Emily, and he felt a pang of bittersweet nostalgia. He approved the grant without hesitation, including a note of encouragement: "Your dream matters. Never let anyone tell you otherwise." Years later, Emily's bakeries, foundation, and mentorship programs had become global institutions. She had touched countless lives, her name synonymous with empowerment and resilience. Her story was told in classrooms, boardrooms, and homes, inspiring people from all walks of life to believe in their potential. As she walked through one of her bakeries one morning, she paused to take it all in. The warm smell of bread, the laughter of customers, the buzz of a thriving business. It was everything she had once dreamed of and more. She looked at a framed photo on the wall, taken at the opening of her first bakery. It was a reminder of where she had started, how far she had come, and the people who had been part of her journey. For Brandon, life had taken on a quieter rhythm. He had sold his mansion and moved into a modest home, finding peace in simplicity. His work as a mentor and philanthropist continued, but he rarely thought about the person he used to be. Instead, he focused on the person he was becoming. One evening, as he flipped through a magazine, he came across an article about Emily's latest project. It featured a photo of her smiling alongside a group of young entrepreneurs, her eyes filled with pride and hope. Brandon smiled to himself, feeling a sense of closure. He didn't need to be part of Emily's life to appreciate her success. She had found her path, and he had finally found his. The story of Emily and Brandon wasn't about revenge or reconciliation. It was about growth, transformation, and the power of resilience. Emily had taken the pain of her past and turned it into something extraordinary, while Brandon had learned to embrace humility and purpose. Their journeys had diverged, but in their own ways, they had both found redemption. And that was more than enough.